Здравейте! Ние всички сме от Балканите, но ще говорим английски. This is a paradox, but not the only paradox which will happen today. Let me first of all introduce the people here who will be participating, just briefly for you to know. First of all, next to me is Igor Štiks. He's a famous and very good writer. He was born in Sarajevo, but now he lives in Belgrade. He has been living in Croatia as well. He has award-winning novels. Two of them are translated in Bulgarian, Elijah's Chair and W. So he also published the monograph Nations and Citizens in Yugoslavia and post-Yugoslavian states. And now I come to Dejan Ubovic. He's also co-founder and co-organizer of the Museum of the 90s, which is actually the main event which brings us here. Dejan Ubovic has been a journalist in independent radio stations. In the 90s, he founded the non-governmental organization Cultural Front, a leading organization for numerous projects in Serbia. In 2009, he founded and directed the European Center for Culture and Debate, GRAT. Here you have a presentation on that, which quickly became a meeting place and shelter for many youth initiatives. And in 2012, he was one of the founders of Association of Independent Cultural Scene in Serbia, and Museum of the 90s, they will explain a little bit, was founded in the 2020. Yara Bubnova, those from Bulgaria, you know her very well. She's been curator based in Sofia since 2019. She has been a director of the National Cultural Gallery in Sofia. She has been a commissioner of the Bulgarian National Pavilion between 19 and 22 at the Biennale di Venezia. Her curatorial work includes international and local individual and group shows, festivals and public art projects. Furthermore, she's a founding member of Institute of Contemporary Art, which is very important for our conversation today. And now, Deputy Mayor of Sofia, Jana Genova. She will open this session, and in the end she will also intervene, and she will intervene because she has been co-authored a book on socialism, so a topic which brings us here together. Jana Genova, opening remarks.
I'm here in rather as a perhaps towards the end as a commentator of what we will hear from the distinguished panelists in a kind of dual identity at least, or maybe triple identity. As a representative of the city of Sofia, being in the position of Deputy Mayor for Culture for the last 6 or 7 months, I would like to restate that the city of Sofia is determined to continue the conversation and take real action on the I wouldn't say a museum, but let's use museum in quotation marks, on finally taking an action on how do we represent and remember the recent socialist past of this country. This has been a long conversation in Bulgaria and in the city of Sofia, and there have been plenty of projects, plenty of ideas in that respect, but we are still in the state of debate, and the debate the context of the debate is changing all the time. So in our governance program for the next 4 years, The Museum of Totalitarianism, or however we call it, is on the agenda, a priority on the agenda. And my other hat today is of someone who has been working on the topic of how do we remember socialism and on the everyday life in socialism, being 20 years ago inspired also by some Serbian projects. For example, a book that maybe some of you here in the hall remember, Lexicon Jugomitologije of Vlada Arsenjević and other people. Here in Bulgaria, we have been inspired with Georgi Gospodinov from that book, among other things, and we published the inventory book of socialism that looked at everyday life during socialist times. And after the publication that raised, it was immediately obvious how the book has been perceived very differently from different audiences. And this is, I hope, one of the questions that we'll be discussing today, as to how we were thinking we are with this book, we are making a comment on life under socialism. But then we've been receiving many positive, enthusiastic remarks from people who have lived during those times. Really some read it as a severe critique of socialism, and some read it as a nostalgic remembering, warming their hearts. So how do we read how do we talk about the recent past, I guess, will be the dominant topic today.
This is exactly the question. What is the main problem in exhibiting recent history? Just imagine we are exhibiting Caesar while Brutus and Mark Antonius are still alive. I mean, this is what I imagine, and it sounds to me the hardest thing in the world. But in the beginning, let us, Mr. Ubovic and Mr. Stix, in 5 minutes, tell us, what is the Museum of the 90s?
So we can start with the presentation. You can talk and I'll be changing slides. That's how we...
So, yeah, I don't know if I really followed the slides, because we really didn't kind of presentational guys, but I will try to be short. Maybe the first question, why Museum of the 90s? So many people asked us. So as you said, how to exhibit the recent past depends from which angle you, these are the rooms of the, we call the labyrinth of the 90s. Our exhibition is called the labyrinth of the 90s. But I just wanted to say that it depends from which angle you, I remember when I talked to my friend from Germany, asked me, what are you doing? I said, but we are making Museum of the 90s. She said, wow, it's great, it's the best time of my life. So for us here, it wasn't the best time of our lives, but the problem, we are trying to do this because somehow we found we still feel the consequences of the 90s, and we still live somehow the 90s in the Balkans, and we still have kind of personalities, as our president is the guy from the 90s. He was the minister of the information in the 97. So the idea, the general initiative called the Museum of the 90s, Regional Center for Reconciliation, Education and Future Cooperation. The final aim is to have a physical building in Belgrade as a living museum. It's not kind of typical museum, but also center for meeting people, education, etc. On that road, to get there, we are planning to travel across the region. Now the Labyrinth of the 90s exhibition is in Historical Museum in Sarajevo. We are going to Montenegro. Croatia is very important for us, even it's like EU, but somehow we see that triangle between Bosnia, Croatia and Serbia kind of crucial for the region. Also, there are plans to cooperate and to go to Pristina. And thanks to this French Institute initiative, we met Bessa, I hope our future partner. So that's the basic idea. I don't know what you see, I cannot see it, but...
No, it's a fun part, costume party, about the 90s that people liked so much, that they all came to dress as Milosevic's wife, as politicians, as stars from the 90s, telling you that there is also in this some sense to present a certain period that is so marked by violence. It's also forgetting that, yes, people been born and people got married and people were having also fun. Even in the hardest days, people were finding ways to find some happiness and something. So we wanted to show this as well, not only the series of political events that happened during this period.
And also, we want just to see it as a local, like a regional thing. We have like also group for global 90s, because the 90s has changed the world in a many different sense. I mean, from the European integration to the collapse of Soviet Union to the technology. The Google was founded in the 90s, etc. So it's not really the Balkan, only the Balkan thing, and not only about the war.
Yes, well, just to be brief, we are running through the presentation, there was this idea that we cannot show everything, that fragments should speak, and that we are going to organize it thematically. So, for instance, we started with symbols, and this is one, for instance, you have two exhibits about symbols. This is a postmark published in 1992, celebrating the 80th anniversary of this Titanic disaster. And so you see Yugoslavia, Titanic, and so on. I don't know if the artist was aware of what he was doing, but it really showed you how things look like. And there you can see a footballer called Siniša Mihajlović. Some of you probably know. Yes. He was quite famous. He comes from Vukovar, and he comes from mixed marriage, Croatian and Serbian mixed marriage. And his family had to escape, and after the war they found this picture. This is him playing for Yugoslavia, and the picture has a bullet hole. And apparently his best friend from childhood, who joined Croatian forces, shot into his picture. And after the war, this person contacted him and said to him, yes, I shot you at your picture. I saved your parents. I couldn't save your house. They burned the house, but I saved your parents. And they reconciled and met in 2000. And Siniša Mihajlović said, I forgave him for everything. After all, we were the best childhood friends. And this is what war did to us. And we found it by chance, this picture that tells you everything. Yeah? Of course, this is Feral Tribune. Many of you would like Žižek. Yeah. Žižek in 96, this is a part called Humor, where you can see Žižek explaining the difference between Balkans and Central Europe. Yeah. In a German TV documentary in 96. So I'll tell you, this is Žižek saying, of course, being a Balkan philosopher, you can say politically incorrect jokes. Yeah. So Žižek is there in Ljubljana and saying, look at this river here, in Ljubljana. This is where Central Europe stops and the Balkan starts. And what is the difference? Well, on one side, you know, in the Balkans, women get raped and beaten by their husbands, but they like it. In the West, they get raped and beaten by their husbands, but they don't like it. That's Žižek. Only Žižek could do it. You know, Kusturica of philosophy. And of course, we are putting all of these things just to show how it looked like. But this is, for instance, for us, extraordinarily important. We all know about war criminals, but this is the room dedicated to our heroes. You can see here Srđan Aleksić, who saved his Bosniak neighbor from Serb soldiers. He himself was a Serb soldier, and then he was killed for saving the life of that person. And this is our hero. He sacrificed his life for his neighbor. Why don't we hear about these stories? Why do we always hear about stories about war criminals? And here you can see all these people on the wall who refuse to shoot. And there is another guy, Croat guy from Herzegovina, Nedeljko Galić, who falsified documents to say 1,000 Bosniak Muslims from Croatian concentration camps. He himself sacrificed his life for these people. This is why we call him Schindler of Herzegovina. So we wanted to give space to them. Some of you will recognize Susan Sontag, who came to Sarajevo during the siege and did a famous play, Waiting for Godot. So as you can see, we are trying also to say, look how many journalists and intellectuals were actually fighting against the politics of the time. But there was something missing in the first exhibition, and that was transition. And you would, of course, recognize it very well. We have a very famous artifact there, which is a golden toilet. You know, our tycoons and oligarchs, you know, they want to display golden toilets. So this is a typical symbol of these years. Criminality, destruction of social property, destruction of industries that basically brought a new caste of people who are still governing our countries. So this is our critical, obviously critical reappraisal of what was happening. And now, I'll stop with this because many of you recognize the word. The word means the future, and that was the utility store in Slavonia. That's how it looked like in '74. It says the future at your service. This is the war, and that region was very difficult and was destroyed. And this is after the war, when there's end of war meant transition. This meant capitalist transformation, and this meant end of industry, end of jobs. And of course, this region is mostly empty now.
Okay, now we can enter into a discussion, and I will bring here also Yara Bubnova in this conversation. Mrs. Bubnova, I actually noticed something interesting 10 years ago, that the article about Todor Živkov in Wikipedia was so big in English, and it was so small in Bulgaria. This was 10 years ago. Now they're almost the same, but the English one is still larger. So the problem in exhibiting recent past, and the Museum of the 90s, maybe we can speak here in Bulgaria, Museum of the 80s on that.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you. I'm absolutely fascinated forever, and I envy our Serbian colleagues and friends for their sense of humor, even when they present and discuss very traumatic contemporaneity or the past. Exhibiting the recent past, it's very easy or impossible. Easy on the basis of curatorial practice and activities of the artists. Because, of course, art is reflexive, sometimes it even predicts situations and conditions, and it analyzes without maybe, Kusturica of the Balkans, Slavoj Žižek. So art sometimes doesn't know its own prophetic options and possibilities, but they happen. The museum, until we understand the museum as something that works for future generations and for the eternity, even being very political, it's totally another story. It's usually a complicated discussion, what deserves to be historicized, how it relates to the real past of the past, or to our vision and understanding of the past, specifically politicization of our today's understanding of things. That's why, in general, the majority of countries, they have their art institutions, art museums, separated. Like we were listening here to the presentation of the new department in the Louvre. So the Louvre collects until 1848. Everybody in France knows why. Then Musée Orsay comes, and then Centre Pompidou. Because the understanding of the historical history, more modern history, and of the yesterday's history is really very different. We politicize even historical history, but what we're doing with the yesterday's history is even more complicated. So on the basis of the directorial responsibilities for the National Gallery, I would say that presentation of the 90s is going through temporary exhibitions still. The discussions even inside of the museum, of course we are very small compared to the Louvre, the discussions about acquisitions and even exhibitions about the 90s are very complicated. Actually, I lived through the 90s and I'm more close to the answer of your friend whom you quoted. I think that the 90s, aside of the territories of the war, were incredibly optimistic. At least for me, it was the last time of social optimism when the communities of people felt that the perspective exists. On the other side, of course, the problem is what you exhibit. It's the interpretation of today's vision and understanding. For example, if I would be brave enough to offer you a contribution to the Museum of the 90s, you know what was it? 1996, I already had a computer and it was a modem and it was possible to connect with other people. And I had a talk with the colleagues in Novi Sad. And they said, sorry, it's an alarm. I have to go to the shelter. And it was during our internet real-time conversation that we have. Through those modems, you know, telephone, that has to be in the museum.
This is very interesting perspective because you know, both of you, that the famous late Serbian cantautor Đorđe Balašević had an album on the 90s and he cursed the 90s. I won't quote it because everybody will understand it very directly. He cursed the 90s. So what Jara Bubnova is saying was more or less the Western perspective of the 90s. This was the best decade for the West. For us, it was mixed because, yes, we were optimists, Jara, at that time, yes, but this was when mafia was born, the hardships of transitions hit. And for you, in the ex-Yugoslavia, this was the worst because there was war. I mean, is this paradox something which has a special meaning in that? Yeah, Igor or Dan?
Yeah, we are. The paradox is already in there in this region because, of course, at the same time you have destruction and everything. Also in the area of former Yugoslavia, even in Serbia under sanctions, and even in Sarajevo under the siege, you know, music was coming, films were coming. People then set up internet in the late 90s mostly. People, you know, went to the Nirvana concert in Ljubljana, the last concert of Nirvana in '94. You went from Zagreb. People from Zagreb will go to listen to Serbian bands in Slovenia, just across the border. People communicating all the time. So yes, at the same time you are part of global events, but you feel obviously excluded from this optimism that was in Berlin or in the States. Now we know that the 90s were not as peaceful. Not only that there was a war in Yugoslavia, there was Rwanda and forgotten war in Algeria, which was a very brutal. Also, this is the rise also of radical Islam. This is also the failures of international Western policies across the world. And of course, we all know, and we would say that the 90s ended with September 11. And it didn't come from nowhere. Internet optimism ended up in a crash. Financial crash, yeah? So that was the internet bubble first. And then also the optimism of Asia ended up in a crash. So it's a very complex era that sometimes we like to see in the West through the rosy vision of Clinton playing saxophone, and the only problem was his affair with Monica Lewinsky, and you know, all these rave parties in Berlin and everything. But as I say, we were at the same time part of it, but obviously we lived differently this period.
And it's just to add the detail as a kind of also part of the paradox of the 90s, which we live today, when the politicians founded in the 90s and nowadays using it, that kind of populism, and using the nationalism in the media, in propaganda for political objectives. Nowadays, we see like between Vučić and Republika Srpska and Kosovo, etc., etc. They are making a performance, political performance, using nationalism in the media to keep this fire in the Balkans like on the low level and to use it before the election, etc. That was the product of the 90s. And now, after the European elections, we see what happened when the right wing and nationalism was awaked. We saw it.
Maybe it was not because we were young at that time, but because the baby boomers, the greatest Western generation, was still in its force at that time. Why? That's why we have this 90s just as something very special, isn't it so, Yara?
Point of view is difficult for me to analyze, but when I was thinking about the topic in general, how to represent the 90s, not how to think about the 90s, but technically how to show it. There are two different things, you know. We lived in the 90s, we have we think that there are very objective memories and we know the reality, but how we're supposed to present it to other people. And because I'm an art historian, and all the time I was thinking about this topic during the debates in the circles of contemporary art. Imagine that during the French Revolution at the end of the 18th century, everything had changed. People had changed. Culture had changed. Education had changed.
Many have died.
Yeah, many people were beheaded. No, some people were beheaded, others died. A lot of people died of hunger. Many people died in the wars. What we have in the history of art? We have incredibly elegant heritage of ancient Egypt through Napoleonic wars coming from that time. This is a very interesting paradox. We don't have the art of the revolution technically, except of newspapers, you know, these type of things. Dailies, basically. What we have a visual change, and this is in our memory, history-wise, between those ladies in crinolines and very elaborated dress, and then this simplistic, post-Egyptian, Napoleonic military war. And this is what happens with us now, because we have a feeling about the 90s, how it had happened. And I would say that when the 90s happened to me, or I happened to the 90s, which would be more correct, I didn't know that we are living during the time when mafia is constructed. The borders became opened. Art could be produced by the individual will of the artist, could be exhibited in different places. And as once one friend of mine, an artist, referring to the memories, he said, "Do you remember we did that when the money were cheap?"
Very, everything is interconnected because our mafia was created in close connection with your war. So our mafia has to do with your war. I'm not saying that you were responsible with but you say something very interesting there, that about the journalism at that time. Journalism in the 90s was much better than journalism today. But nevertheless, the truth about the war is not ingrained in conscience of people. How can we explain that? Better journalism, fake news was still not a concept, it was the old-fashioned lie which was there on the ground, but still, people still didn't know and now still don't know the truth about the war, and they don't want to know. How about that?
I mean, I agree, the media situation was much better in the 90s. It sounds ridiculous, but it was. But I think the biggest problem in the Balkans, I mean, former Yugoslavia is educational part. Still, we have several, 5 at least, different history books on the same events and same in Bosnia, in Serbia, etc. Everybody has their own truth, and I mean, for us, when we get at the moment when this Bosnian Schindler or Srđan Aleksić will be in the books, then we will kind of face the future. When we see Ratko Mladić, graffiti, murals around Belgrade, etc., we are still in the labyrinth of the 90s, unfortunately. What we're going to do, we can do only what we can do as individuals, as initiatives like this, to cooperate between each other, but educational problem is at the really bottom, at the very starting point. Media, it's, I mean, now, liberalism, I mean, everything is open, the truth is all over. We have some ridiculous guys on YouTube, TikTok. We saw also European elections, so everything is open. Yeah.
You're right, we live in a paradox, and of course, you would remember, especially during the period of Cold War, especially in the zone that was under the Soviet influence, there was a whole this pluralism. No? We want pluralism, and now we got it. And you know, where is the truth? We don't know. Now, when we have all these instruments to get to the truth, no, we stick to very simplistic explanation of our reality. That's been reinforced by obviously these echo chambers on Twitter, on the social media, TikTok, and so on. So we got into total perversion of that situation. As you said, we in the Balkans, as we mentioned in the interview that we did before, we did many things first. You know, we don't get enough credit for that, but we did many things first. Fake news, you know, classical propaganda, but also these alternative facts. You know, Donald Trump comes 20 years later with alternative fact. We had it already in the Balkans. You show me the fact, you show me the truth. No, I have my alternative truth. And that's how it works until today. We often say that we were the dark avant-garde of today's world because many concepts been tested. Populism. I mean, Milosevic was far ahead of the time. In '87 with the Kosovo crisis, he started with this classical populism. Yeah? No one should beat you. You are right. They are wrong, and so on. He managed to mobilize masses with the simplistic truth that other people in the government at that time in various republics could not understand. This was not the way how to speak. Yeah? So in socialist times, there was a way how a politician should behave. He changed everything overnight. And then he knew the power of television. So he put his guys on TV, Belgrade, and had 3 years to prepare this. And then, of course, the others followed the example.
Are you saying that for the truth, it's better to be banned than to be banality?
This is an important thought. The banned truth is powerful, you know, as we know from Dissidence. When you chase the truth, you put people in prison for writing novels and whatever, so it means that the truth is powerful and important. And somehow we have to get to the truth. Today, you know, it's been banalized. The truth's been banalized. So nobody cares, nobody is willing to die for truth.
Nobody.
Almost.
Because the truth is so banal, so obvious. There are much more interesting things than truth, aren't they? Yara, you have at least 3 reasons to be emotional on that war happening right now. What do you think can art respond to that war better than the art responded on the French Revolution you just described?
I'm not sure that art can do something better than it's usually can do and what we expect from it. The problem is, because when it was about heroes of difficult times and heroes of truth, let's say, it's about words and text. What is truth in visual arts? This is a very specific and very complicated philosophic question. images can lie. There are trends in art history about that, about the treachery of image. What you see is what you get. There are a lot of beautiful slogans during the modernist history of art. In our times, the difficulty is that what you see maybe is absolutely not what had happened, and you definitely can be able not to get it. Inability to get what you see. Art historically can't participate in a war. It's usually a reaction. Or, like it was in Yugoslavia, it's all those formats of art presence that we are absolutely, now we are quoting it, is, school books things, like manifestation of Serbian women in black. Those target signs on their bodies for, can I name who was bombing them? Or today it's already difficult to say.
We have it all in the Museum of the 90s.
Yeah, exactly. It's a delicate topic.
No, but because, you know, you're saying much more paradoxic thing. Women in black were protesting Milosevic and the regime. Yeah. Other people, some maybe part of them, but not all of them, were protesting the NATO bombardment.
Yes. No, the question is, your question is about what art can do. Art can make things more visible, and how art is doing it. And again, we are now actually re-evaluating the experience of the people who did those things, those performative political actions, without being an activist. When they were doing it, they had their own specific understanding of the situation and feeling of the conditions. In the history of art, every public activity, which has visual language included, will be remembered as part of the time, not so much to find out who demonstrated, because it's not a political, organized political activity, who is doing it, but what are the reasons.
I very much agree on one of your points, and then I'll come to Igor, that paradoxically, and I'm the one who is working with television, but paradoxically, images can lie better than the spoken word. Much better, and sometimes without our intention, because it is our eyes which are lying to us in the best way. But Mr. Stix,
I had an illustration, because we mentioned the power of art, but also the power of a gesture, as you said. And I want you to show this. See the picture behind these two people. This is them now visiting our exhibition 30 years later. You can see them there. Those are Sarajevo newlyweds in '95. You can see the sniper protection curtain there, and they are walking bravely through the street. And there was a war photographer, Danilo Krstanovic, who was there on the spot and said, "Can I take a picture?" And he took this picture, and this is today one of the most famous war photography picture. And this is two of them now. They are still married, have 2 kids, live in Sarajevo. So this gesture of simply, you know, defying the fate is something that we can even read today as something that gives us optimism in a hard time.
but how have you reacted when you heard one of the greatest philosophers of our times, Jürgen Habermas, saying 77 years there was no war in Europe? Obviously, he has forgotten these wars. Or he doesn't think Balkans are Europe, or he doesn't care. I mean, don't you think that we forget wars, and that's why we have new ones, right? Mr. Ubovic or Mr. Stix?
I mean, we had in Belgrade exhibition, we have impression books, of course, and we had some, I remember German young student, he just wrote, "This was really happened. I thought that the last European war ended in 1945. That's true. I mean, it's written. So I don't know. Maybe the paradox is because the 90s in the West was kind of really going positive and opening and unification, etc. We were in a dark bottom of the Europe. Somehow people forgot or ignore. Yeah, but also regarding paradox in 1999, I was working at that time on Radio B92 as a main enemy of the state and Milosevic, etc. And then the NATO bombing started. And I was, wow, what to do now? You are putting the NATO under the bombs as a main enemy of the state. It was a ridiculous, paradox situation. But it happened.
Yeah. But just about Habermas, because I happen also to, to have a degree in philosophy, and I read Habermas a lot, you know, he was busy writing about post-national constellation. He was busy thinking about the relationship between the French and the Germans. That was the major thing he was thinking. He was talking about post-national constellation, about moving into the, you know, unified Europe and how it's going to look like. And this is the paradox that is a classical Western paradox, not our. You let the city, which is a symbol of Europe, which is Sarajevo, to be destroyed for 4 years. All these NATO aviation, all these big armies, French army, whatever, couldn't do anything against Serb extremists who were bombing Sarajevo for 4 years, which is a symbol of this unified Europe. This is really fantastic. So in this respect, you know, I'm almost cynical when I see now that the European Union is not doing as great. We were working on post-national constellations. That was called Socialist Yugoslavia, federal, supranational country. We had cities that are speaking about diversity and tolerance and whatever. And you let these people die, well, you know, this is why I'm so slightly skeptical of seeking help. And there are people obviously seeking help today from Europe. It's not going to come. Baudrillard had a very interesting text in Libération in '94, very cynical in his way. And he said, you know what, it seems to me that the real Europeans are not these Sarajevans we see on TV who are saying to people, but we are Europe, we are multicultural, we are like you. No, he said, I think that people who are bombing them are actually true Europeans. They are announcing a white Europe. He said, Europe blanche, Europe blanchie. They are announcing the Europe to come. And he wrote it in '94. And the title of the text, which gave me a lot of pain and anger, was Pas de pitié pour Sarajevo. No mercy for Sarajevo. But he was right.
Unfortunately, many problems come from reading the wrong books. One of the explanations of Western inaction towards Sarajevo was that Hillary Clinton read Robert Kaplan's book Balkan Ghosts, which have this stereotype about the Balkans, which always killed, eat, and, you know, I don't know, rape themselves. Just let them do that and just enjoy that these savages doing that and don't interfere. Well, do you see this cynism towards the West, on the side of the West towards Ukraine right now, Yara?
No, I think not. I think something a little bit changed. I agree with Igor not to wait for help, because we see how the procedures and processes had happened. But of course, I mean, we are dissatisfied with that situation. But the 90s, they were all about naming of the Balkans in different languages from European, wherever border happens. The exhibitions that had happened at that time, of contemporary art from the Balkans, actually other colleagues, artists and curators from other post-Soviet countries envied us, and they were saying everybody is concentrated on the Balkans. There are not so many shows for Czech artists or Polish artists. It's all about the other side of Europe, blood and honey. It's all about the Balkans. We felt very uncomfortable because they're right. It was not about the inclusive opening of doors of the Eastern Europe, you know, the cutted tradition of modernism, what had happened to recognize each other. It was a trend.
Are we really interested in Ukraine right now? You tried to make an exhibition.
This is another story. Thank you very much for giving me this hint. The war of Russia in Ukraine started on 22nd of February 2022. On 24th, there were already missiles and bombings. And in April, I did an exhibition at the National Gallery with friends and colleagues from Ukraine, from Kiev, inviting an artist to be a curator and to do the easiest was possible because we didn't understand technically. Desperation was much stronger than whatever thinking about perspectives, and they sent me videos from the cities which were already bombed. Mariupol, Odessa, Kiev, Dnipro, and the National Gallery, which is type of a state, you know, official big institution, did an exhibition inviting, as we usually invite, with a very specific underlining of representatives of diplomatic missions, the government, the parliament, journalists as well. I was absolutely devastated. Nobody came to the opening of the exhibition of Ukrainian contemporary art, of the artists who still at that time, and mainly many of them are still there on the territory of Ukraine because they are male, they even can't travel out of the borders. And the show was about how they, inside the country, they knew that it will happen, and they expected it. There were video works about young people who meet each other in different places in those post-socialist big cities of Ukraine, and they're discussing about this, again, prophetic expectation of disaster. Nothing happens because now the hurricane will come. Nobody was interested. Now, maybe the situation is different because I'm working with the National Gallery and my colleagues there on the preparation of the exhibition, which is named In the Eye of the Storm, Secession from Ukraine, and it's a very specific story, and it's about responsibility of museums. It's about artifacts saved from the Ukrainian museums which are under the bombing, and they are taken off the borders of the country, and they're traveling in different places in Europe, and I think it's incredibly important for our different publics, because it's a country that we know everything, but we don't know much. Specifically, we don't know much about its history and culture and art and language. Another thing, it's a burden to live in peace, because we have to do something. It's not maybe about participation, but we have to do something. We have to save and to protect the things that are identifying Ukraine, the cultural identity artifacts. So I can't say that it's welcomed with huge enthusiasm on different levels of administration and political situation, but it's about the 90s. Many things were done without greetings and welcoming from the authorities, so we're doing it, as usual, you say.
We will follow this event because there are many interesting things about identity. For example, was Malevich an Ukrainian or Russian? I don't want to...
I only want to tell you, we were talking about the Balkans. Let's not transfer...
Let's not Balkanize this issue.
that topic.
I'm just, provocative. I'm just a nasty journalist, but, back to Igor and Dejan, I knew very well Zoran Djindjic, and I asked him the question about the catharsis. This was just before he had taken power in the year 2000. And you may presume his answer. He was very rational. He said, let's fix first thing first. Let's fix the heating, let's fix economy, let's help the people who are on the street, and then catharsis came. And then catharsis will come. This is what he said. Paradoxically, he was killed because of the absence of catharsis in society. Isn't that? Would you agree with me? And if I'm right and he was wrong, what is the answer about the catharsis right now?
I mean, he was I can totally agree with his ideas, and he was first, very first, far in the past to offering idea to solve the Kosovo problem before everybody. And now we are still living in the European Union concerns about Kosovo and the dialogue, never-ending dialogue, etc. But he was also saying that only with the facing the past, with the 90s, we can go to the future, very rationally, yeah.
I mean, is it possible at all? Because we know about one catharsis, and it was Germany. Remind me of other catharses, if you can.
Yeah, and it didn't happen on their own.
Yes.
It happened under the occupation. It happened when you put it, it means that it's a state project. It's not something that will come out of society. And also, let's not forget so many Nazis alive and kicking in West Germany in the 60s and 70s, who sort of passed through denazification. It took us a long time to catch these guys from Auschwitz and so on. And
they were beautiful in your books,
yeah.
Described in your books, very beautiful.
I mean, this is what they bring to the Balkans as a model. This obviously cannot be a model. It meant you have to defeat militarily an entire country and then impose certain new political model where sort of catharsis will happen. One of the inspirations for our exhibition was the exhibition on Wehrmacht, on German army in the 90s. The exhibition was opened in 94, when majority of Germans had to know what we all knew in the Balkans, that the German army, not only SS, not only the Nazis, but the German army was participating in mass crimes, genocide and Holocaust. It was in 94, so almost 50 years later. And there was a huge shock. And the exhibition was going around Germany, and it was a total social shock. Many didn't accept it, even the authors were threatened, and there were some bombs planted and stuff like that. They couldn't face the truth. Yes, your father was not just some soldier who somehow survived the war. No, he was probably a bit in Yugoslavia, a bit in Ukraine, a bit in France, where German army was doing the job. And so, 50 years later, it was difficult to speak about that. We are facing a very difficult task. It's only 30 years, and obviously we are facing a very strong enemy. Everywhere in all these countries who have a lighter or harder version of nationalist in power. This is the dominant ideology. What we do is a counter-hegemonic project, is an activist project. As I said and mentioned very often, Vucic, guys in Croatia, in almost every part of Bosnia, they are the curators of the Museum of the 90s. They have their own Museum of the 90s, each one of them. And they are putting their little thing as they want to present it to the audiences. So they are the real curators, and we have to face them. This is when we did this show in Belgrade, they just didn't pay attention. Just didn't pay attention, which is better than sending hooligans and thugs to beat us up. Better. But they were like, okay, you have your little truth in some activist circles. We don't care.
And just regarding catharsis, at the mainstream level, I just remember, because football now is started yesterday, last World Championship, in the time, semi-final, I think, Croatia-Morocco. Our president, in prime time, on TV, said that it's, of course, it's natural to support our Moroccan brothers than Croatians. That's it about catharsis.
Well, art is not about a catharsis since Aristotle, right, Yara?
It depends. It depends. I'm like, the cathartic reactions, societal cathartic reactions could be not we expect from them. But the theory about art is a tiny opening for cathartic energies. Actually, in Bulgaria, was produced at the end of socialist times. There are the texts that I read by pretty smart, we name them communist politicians or statesmen. Politicians is a little bit difficult to say, a statesman who analyzed the energy of art and culture, which was not the protest directly, risks were too big, but who art and culture, visual arts and literature and cinema, of course, the energy was seriously against the governing of the time. So a lot of tiny political decisions were made to help this high-pressure air to go out through bigger holes than the smaller ones, using the examples of political decisions in Yugoslavia, giving permissions here and there, but never for the radical things, but accepting things that could happen, and it prevented the cathartic evolution of the situation. I think that now we have this same condition, like you said, nobody pays attention. Politicians don't pay attention. There were, like in the 90s, I was proud with that when our colleagues from other countries were coming to Sofia, and I was saying, you know, it's very surprising. We don't have censorship here on visual images. You can do whatever you want, and it will be normally accepted in the context of, let's say, Polish reaction, religious reaction, for example, against feminist images in art, and even later imprisonment of a female artist for presentation of a naked body in the context of Christianity. And people were saying, you will see, it will not stay like that for a long time. And it didn't stay. One very particular day and moment, the mayor of Sofia at that time, Mr. Boyko Borisov, came to tear down a poster of a concert of Aziz. I have photos of the situation. This is how the absolute freedom in visual images stopped. And today we have 18 plus, 12 plus discussion of wording, what we show to whom, targeting particular audience, because I still don't know, we are scared by the audience, or we are trying not to scare the audiences.
Where does it come from? Does it come directly from politicians, or does it come from social media divisions via politicians?
Maybe you can join us. You said you're going to speak at the end, but why not?
Why not, yeah.
Sure, I can answer the question, but I was rather interested if we can go back to what Igor was saying earlier about the perception of the exhibition and the museum in the nowadays Serbia, and how this whole project is perceived in nowadays Serbia. Because what we have here is, we have a civil society initiative for, taking over the usual space of the traditional museums, of documenting and building a narrative, as Ciara was building a political narrative for a certain period. You are, of course, avoiding building a single narrative because you keep talking about fragments. And that's okay in 21st century. But I was wondering, do you have, because in nowadays Serbia, you're talking about the war in nowadays Serbia in the context of a current war, in the context of a growing disapproval of any possible EU membership of the country, and in the context of existing established museum institutions such as the Museum of Yugoslavia, which is actually a place of heroism for Tito rather than a museum of Yugoslavia, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. So, are we still talking about the two Serbias? Or do you have any ambitions other than the staying at the place of civil society and doing what you're doing greatly?
Let me see, this is not only Serbian project. He can speak about Serbia. I only live there as a foreigner. So it's not only about Serbia. It cannot be only about Serbia. As you can see, it's about former Yugoslavia, from Slovenia to Macedonia. And also, we have different situations in each of these countries. So in Sarajevo, we were accepted by Historical Museum of Bosnia and Herzegovina to show our exhibition there. But Historical Museum of Bosnia and Herzegovina is a state institution. What does it mean to be a state institution in Bosnia and Herzegovina? It means no funding, because all funding is in entities and cantons. So if you belong to the state, internationally recognized state, they don't have funding for 10 years. So they are true activists, and then they decided to keep the building and save it, because obviously nationalist politicians do not want to fund Historical Museum of Bosnia and Herzegovina because they have their own versions of history. So in a way, we fill that gap to provide the context for what is their main exhibition on the siege of Sarajevo, where also you have obviously conflicts about how to present and what to present. We have a big problem how to bring our exhibition to Croatia. And it's absolutely necessary. And because there is some kind of consensus of what happened, Croatia was in war, 91, was a victim of aggression, then it was end of war, 95, goodbye. The next thing, EU funds, blah, blah, blah. No, so we forget everything. Now you bring a different perspective. Wait a minute, let's go back. Let's see what happened to the war. Let's see not only that Croatia was a victim of aggression, but also that Croatian troops did a lot of war crimes, and then that the result of the Oluja action, the storm action, was the expulsion of Serbs from Croatia. Yeah? In Serbia, perspective on war is like the war started in 1995, when Croats expelled Serbs. It didn't start in 91. Sarajevo, Srebrenica, let's not talk about that. And then what happened? NATO bombing. Out of blue. Out of blue. You know, Serbs being punished simply for being Serbs. So this is the ideology we are facing. In all of these, so it will be very challenging in each of these places to bring this exhibition that is showing you various sides, mixture of everyday life resistances and political events, but we certainly never go beyond certain facts that for us are crucial. Number one, violence that was committed, numbers, and also genocide in Srebrenica. So we are not avoiding, we are not playing word games about what was happening. We are talking about concentration camps from various sides. We are talking about atrocities, but without relativizing. Saying, oh, everybody did this. No, we have numbers. We could tell you where and how this happened and who did it. So we are not avoiding the truth, and you're right, we are doing the job of the state institutions. They don't want to do this job. One of them is also Museum of Yugoslavia, which is Museum of Yugoslavia. So it stops in 1990. And as you mentioned, they got Tito's villa, and they got Tito's depot of Tito's gifts. And this is how they function in a gray zone where Serbia doesn't know what to do with them. It doesn't know what to do with Tito. Yeah? So you see, it's an ideologically very complex landscape, but we are not neutral. I mentioned fragments, but we have very strong political convictions. This is why I said this is counter-hegemonic. It's certainly anti-fascist, it's certainly anti-nationalist, and now you can see where it's placed on an ideological spectrum, but certainly goes against the dominant narratives.